Well, this morning on Media and Society, we're celebrating the life and legacy of the legendary Dr. Peter Magubane.
When he was a schoolboy. Born in 1932 in Frederdorp, Johannesburg, Peter Magubane will become
I don't want anyone to stand in front of me when I take pictures. I become like a lion.
a passion that began after his father bought him a camera when he was a schoolboy. Born in 1932 in Frederdorp, Johannesburg, Peter Magubane will become an international struggle icon. Growing up in Sophiatown, he would use his camera as a voice to oppose the apartheid government, capturing the everyday experiences and struggles of his black South Africans. In the process, Magubane's lenses recorded some of the country's historical moments, including the pivotal Bravery trial and the Sharpeville massacre. Following the horror of the 1960 massacre, liberation movements were banned and many activists and political leaders were arrested or forced into exile.
When people were leaving South Africa to go to other countries like Zambia, other parts of Africa, I said, no, I will remain here. I will fight apartheid with my camera. I know the pictures will go all over the world, and the world will see how South Africa operates.
Magubane would work for numerous magazines and newspapers, among them the iconic drum magazine, the Rand Daily Mail and the Times. Among Magubane's most iconic images were those of Winnie Mandela, whom he would later become friends with. In 1969, he was arrested while photographing protesters outside the prison where she and other political activists were being imprisoned. He was held in solitary confinement for 586 days for practicing his craft. Following his release, Magubane covered the student uprising of June 1976, producing a sequence of pictures that brought him international recognition and acclaim, notwithstanding the continued police harassment.
Even though at one point in Tembisa they shot me 17 times with buckshots. But I survived that. The school children that were there quickly took me to the hospital where I spent 20 days. That was the toughest time I've ever been through.
Following Nelson Mandela's release in 1990, Magubane will be selected to become his official photographer, a responsibility he held until the 1994 historical democratic elections. On the birth of South Africa's democracy, Magubane stopped covering news, instead focused on his exhibiting and publishing books on his pictures done over a long career as one of South Africa's leading photojournalists. In recognition of his contribution, Magubane received a number of honorary doctorates as well as winning several awards abroad and here at home. The most notable being a National Order in 2017, the highest honor South Africa can bestow an individual.
I feel good. I say to myself, at least someone has recognized me. Someone is saying, you have been doing all, you have done a good job all these years.
A praise for her father. Magubane survived by his daughter and 2 sons.
Wena wakwankomo inkone zinja zafulethelana entabeni yakwaMagubane wena wakwathole kungesilithole lenkomo kodwa kuyithole lo muntu halala Magubane.
Well, a good morning to you and welcome to Media and Society. I am your host, Naledi Moleo. Of course, this is the show where we take a look at how the media and you intersect. Over the next hour, feel free to give us a call on the number 011-714-0661 or 0662. Let's get into our discussion for the morning. Well, renowned apartheid chronicler Dr. Peter Magubane, who captured South African struggles through his lens, has passed away at the age of 91. He rose to prominence at Drum magazine, where his stark image of a Europeans-only bench juxtaposing white leisure and black labor became a defining photograph. Throughout his life, Dr. Magubane documented the anti-apartheid movement, Nelson Mandela's arrest and the Soweto uprising. He endured harassment, assault, and even over 500 days of solitary confinement. Yet his lens never flinched. In the post-apartheid era, he became former President Nelson Mandela's official photographer. Today, we celebrate Dr. Peter Magubane, an icon who epitomized the power of the media to reveal hidden truths and empower the unheard. And joining us, of course, to pay homage to this legendary storyteller, we are joined via Zoom by Mr. Vern Harris, who is the acting Nelson Mandela Foundation Chief Executive and also archivist for the foundation. We're joined as well by Mr. Reggie Mwalusi, who is the Executive Director of the South African National Editors Forum. Kona Dlamini joins us in studio. She, of course, is the Programs Manager for the Photo Market Workshop. And also joining us via Teams is Mr. Rashid Lombard, who is a veteran jazz and political photojournalist. It's going to be a rich discussion. Give us a call. Share with us the images that really stand out when you think of the legacy of Dr. Peter Magubane. The number 011-714-0661 or 0662. I'm going to start with our guests that are joining us via Teams, and I'll start with Mr. Rashid Lombard. Good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us. I was speaking to my colleagues earlier as we played that package that really showed really just some of the work of Dr. Magubane, and I was saying, looking at his life, 91 years old, one could easily say that was a life well lived. Your initial thoughts when you heard of his passing and how you describe the life that was Dr. Peter Magubane?
Well, yeah, it was kind of a shock that he passed, but we were expecting it. I have been in contact with him. I have been seeing him recently, whenever I am in Johannesburg. But yes, the history, not only of his work, I think the character itself, the way he would deal with younger photographers, the way he'd share his expertise, his contacts, and I saw him doing that as long as I knew him. I got to know him in the late 70s, so we became familiar all these years. But the importance is knowledge. I think that's important. It's great we have all his images. His images speaks for itself. It will speak to young people. But I think the character of Dr. Magubane is very important about how he dealt with his own knowledge.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot in my head, and it's very sudden this morning. But yeah, I mean,
yeah, I think
I'll rethink some more thoughts.
Well, and we're going to pick at them. We really are going to pick at them, Mr. Lombard, because there really is so much, right? When you speak about his character, so many elements that we can really talk about, and we're going to try our best to cover all of them. Let me bring in Mr. Vern Harris. You have been the archivist at the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and one can imagine how much you have continued to interact with the work of Dr. Magubane. I imagine that after his passing, you've had a lot of traffic, people wanting to come and look at some of the archives.
Well, look, we worked with Peter on many projects over the years, and he has donated a substantial a number of his images to us for our own public education programs. But I would want to just say up front that I was also privileged to live in the same neighborhood as Peter for many years, Melville, 1 block away from each other. So often I would bump into him and we would just chat, a larger-than-life character beyond his work as a photographer.
Yeah, and I can only imagine what those discussions would have looked like. Reggie, let's come to you with the South African National Editors Forum. I mean, perhaps you'd like to talk about your initial thoughts of his passing and how you describe his contribution to the media landscape in South Africa.
Thanks, Naledi. Good morning to your viewers and to your fellow guests. Look, I mean, as SANEF, we were obviously quite shocked of the passing. It came as a surprise, but Dr. Magubane was 91 years old, and Dr. Magubane has done quite a lot. And if you remember well, he didn't even retire at the set age of 60 years old. And we, as younger media practitioners, we've got a lot to take in. We've got a lot to learn about Dr. Magubane. I mean, personally, my first instance of studying photojournalism, this was in 1997, and that's way back. And one of the lecturers there, gave us this book and said, this is the book that you need to start with. And it's a book chronicling the history of Soweto, June 1976. And it's a book that's for keeps. And it's a book that, when you sit to go through it, you realize that we were quite fortunate to have someone of Dr. Magubane's caliber as a teacher, as someone who teaches us, as someone that we can learn from. So as a younger generation, as a South African National Editors Forum, we are shocked.
Yeah. Shocked, but certainly a lot to be said about the legacy, right? And you speak about younger photographers. Of course, we are joined in studio by Siskona Dlamini, who's the programs manager of the Photo Market Workshop. Talk to us about the Photo Market Workshop, the work that you do, and then the conversations that happens within the Photo Market Workshop when you start looking at the life of Dr. Peter Magubane.
Thank you, Naledi. So the Market Photo Workshop is a school of photography. It's based in Newtown, and the interest of the Market Photo Workshop is primarily to make photography training accessible. And I say accessible because it has not been accessible for 2 reasons. During apartheid, it was because Black people were not allowed to study photography formally, but in this day and age, the inaccessibility is based on how expensive photography is, because it is a very expensive medium to pursue. So what the Market Photo Workshop does is make photography accessible, particularly for people who would not ordinarily be able to afford it otherwise. An important part of the work that we do is to encourage visual narratives, so stories that come from the communities, that are taken by young people from the various communities that they come from. And we encourage them to take stories based on their lived realities, not what they think people want to see, but exactly how they experience their communities, how people within their communities experience the life that they live. And that's a very important aspect for us as the Market Photo Workshop. Yeah,
I quite like the intentionality behind that, right? Document your own stories, and perhaps, if we will, let's go down the path of history and really start to look at particular moments in the life of Dr. Peter Magubane. And Mr. Lombard, I'll come back to you on this one and talk about what stands out for you, particularly where we look at the 1976 student uprising. In one interview that Dr. Peter Magubane did, he talks about how even during that chaos in Soweto, he had to say to children that were protesting in the streets, "Let me document you." And that particular conversation of having to say, this is a moment that we want to remember. What you are doing today is so important. Let me help you by taking these images. I mean, let's talk a little bit about what you heard from him about those moments that really stand out around 1976. Mr. Lombard.
Hi, and it's Rashid. I think, the fact that I wasn't there, I was a bit too young, I think, but the fact that he could talk about the experience of how, I think what's important that came out of that is the feeling of his youth. how brave they are, how fearless they were, how they could take on any system with bricks and stones and whatever means they could find. And I think that's so critical about anger control. And this happens to society. It happens in other areas where there's conflict. But I think Peter was good in explaining, not only to the youth, but to us afterwards, that this is how they are, this is who they are, and this is how you must treat with them. Hence, there was a couple of times that journalists in particular were attacked by students and protesters, and Peter had to step in and just say, stop it. This is important what these people are doing. How do your story get out? How does the world know about why you're doing this? So he was good at turning things around. And I think that's very critical as a professional, and I mean, Peter was a professional of the highest level, so it was good that it comes from someone that actually experienced it and been through it personally.
Yeah. Reggie, I want to bring you in here because some of the images that were playing out here on the screen that were taken by Dr. Magubane after the student uprisings in 76 would have hit international stages, right? Can we talk a little bit about the impact of some of these images in how the world started to look at South Africa as a result of the images that were taken at that very important and critical history-shaping time of our country?
Yeah, look, Naledi, and these are images that he took, without planning the image to say, I'm going to take that shot, I'm going to ask for permission and all of that. And often the media, journalists, particularly photojournalists, are regarded as, the capturers of the first draft of history. And it's exactly that here. It's exactly what he did because, I mean, before even June 76, what happened way back during Sharpeville, the international community knew, particularly through the work of photographers, what was happening in South Africa. So the work that he further captured across Soweto, what was happening there, and other photographers, who were capturing what was happening in Cape Town, in Langa, across the country. So these were quite important. The international community got to know there are photographers in South Africa doing such work, and it was work of high importance. It was quality work. Hence, these kind of photographers, they went on, to hog the international limelight and to be widely respected. If you go anywhere in journalism circles, I mean, our photojournalists are ranked above, some of the best in the world. And Dr. Magubane is right up there. So we got to know, the world got to know about June 76 through Sam Nzima, through Dr. Magubane, through Len Khumalo. So those were and Bra Alf, those were the generation that were saying, here's history, and this cannot just be kept within the confines of South Africa. The international community needs to know about it.
Yeah, we're also joined now via Teams by Mr. Matata Tsedu, who is a veteran journalist. Mr. Tsedu, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us on Media and Society as we pay homage to the life and legacy of veteran photojournalist Dr. Peter Magubane. Good morning to you. Perhaps as you enter the conversation, give us your thoughts about. We've been talking about the images that he took, particularly during the student uprisings, and we'll continue, of course, looking at different parts of his career. But an image that stands out for you from the uprisings?
Well, to start with, I've got quite a number of calls from people during the week wanting to know whether it was Peter who took the picture of June 16. And of course it wasn't him, it was Sam Nzima. But Peter's body of work, not just on the first day, but throughout the uprising, there is one picture for me of a young boy with a tear coming down. And this is at a funeral that Peter was covering. That told the story of the pain the anguish. And because Peter was working for the Rand Daily Mail, which had links with the Guardian in London, his pictures were then syndicated across the world that way, and that brought Peter a lot of attention that led him to work even for the New York Times, Time magazine, Life, even the UN, because of that exposure.
Yeah, it's interesting because you describe that picture so vividly that I can see it and I can feel the emotion behind it. And that's the thing about photography that we don't talk about very often, that a picture can have so many words. We're seeing that picture right now of Magubane Mandela that just came up on the screen. And Vern, if I come back to you and, you know, perhaps you can talk to us a little bit about his relationship, not just with the former President Nelson Mandela, but certainly as well with Winnie Madikizela Mandela. The images that really stand out for you that he was able to capture about these two iconic figures, and really what the impact of some of those images that stand out for you really was, in your view.
Yeah, thank you, Naledi. I think with Peter's work, notable is that he was documenting Madiba in the 50s, and then during that long imprisonment, he documented the family. And I think of two images. One is of Mamwini looking out of the gate of the Orlando home. Through the gate, just an incredibly poignant image. Another one was, for me, one that he took of her in Brandfort with Zinzi, capturing the pain, the longing, but also I think, you know, representing the special relationship that he had with the family, and he provided support to the family in many different ways during those prison years. And then, of course, when Madiba came out of prison, Peter followed Madiba relentlessly in those first few years. And for me, a standout image is the one he took in Archbishop Tutu's home, the first day of freedom for Madiba. And it's an image of him and Mum Winnie walking together through the garden, surrounded by flowers. And again, there's a poignancy to that image, knowing what was going to unfold in the next couple of years.
Yeah, incredible. Incredible. Let's talk a little bit about what this means to young photojournalists, this is Connor, because you work with these storytellers, you tell them to go into their communities and tell the stories of what is really going on in their communities. Do they understand the value of what they're doing? And I mean, where we look at the legacy of people like Dr. Peter Magubane, who spent 568 days in solitary confinement as a result of pictures, capturing images. Do they understand the impact of what they're doing as they hold that lens? Because it must be quite a conversation to have with them, that you're not just taking pictures, you're capturing history here.
Yeah. It's a conversation that's very important that we have with our students. How we always put it is that as photographers, as chroniclers of the world as it is now, they have a responsibility. They have a responsibility to tell stories as they are. They have a responsibility to be honest, to be frank, and also to be sensitive, to care. And it's interesting that a lot of young people who go into photography also have a deep concern about community. They have a curiosity about people, and I think that personality trait that a lot of them seem to share helps, because then the type of images, the type of stories that they end up taking or showing rather, stories that matter to them. And that's how we put it. It's not about what you think the world wants to see, what you think would sell, what you think the media would buy, but it's what are the stories that are important that you think the world needs to know about. And that is very important.
Yeah. And we hope that, you know, as we keep saying that to young photojournalists, that the work continues and we still keep telling, you know, poignant stories through images. We're going to take your calls. Give us a call on 011-714-0661 as we pay homage to the life and legacy of photojournalist Dr. Peter Magubane. Share your thoughts with us about images that really stand out for you and what the impact of them was in your view. The number again, 011-714-0661. We take a short break. We'll continue with our conversation on the other side of this. Welcome back. We continue to celebrate the life and legacy of photojournalist Dr. Peter Magubane. Now, one of the key strengths of photojournalism, of course, is the ability to bring attention to marginalized communities and to amplify their voices. And by capturing the realities of individual communities who are often overlooked or underrepresented, photojournalists really can challenge societal norms and bring about some change. So through their lens, they can expose the harsh realities of poverty, discrimination, inequality that prompts viewers to take action and demand change. We, of course, celebrate the life of Dr. Magubane, who was a pioneer in times of strife, and his work was one of the voices at a time that inspired great change. And we still are joined by Matata Tsedu, who is a veteran journalist, Vernon Harris, acting Nelson Mandela Foundation Chief Executive and Archivist. We're also joined by Mr. Reggie Mwalusi, who is the Executive Director for the South African National Editors Forum. And in studio, we are joined by Kona Dlamini, who is Programs Manager of the Photo Market Workshop, and as well as Mr. Rashid Lombard, who joins us as well via team, veteran jazz and political photojournalist. We certainly, during the break there, Connor, you and I were making a point there around censorship, and I think it's an important point to be made. You talk about there was censorship back then, and this is essentially why the likes of Dr. Magubane were necessary, you know, in a pre-democracy South Africa. Is this still an issue today?
Yes, I think censorship, sometimes when people talk about censorship, they think only of state censorship. There are many ways in which media can be silenced, in which people who try to tell stories can be silenced. And one of the ways that increasingly has become the norm is actually through capital, advertisers, essentially. When whoever is paying a media company or a platform something, then says whoever writes or whatever it is that you can say is based on these terms. These are things that you cannot talk about, and if you do talk about these things, you talk about them in this particular way. So I think when it comes to censorship, we also have to look at the gray areas, what might not be in your face. It's not quite as in your face as it was in the past, but there are many ways in which control is still somehow leveraged in terms of what can be told by who and how and when, if at all. Sometimes there's stories that don't come out because censorship.
Yeah, I wonder how much of that has to do with ownership, right? And Rashid, I'm going to bring this one to you. One of the things that I think has stood out about the life of Dr. Magubane in an interview that he did as well, he talked about, you know, there needing to be some sort of discussion around photographers and who owns the images that they take, and perhaps that is what will help us deal with giving photographers the freedom to tell the story they want to tell. I mean, how do we work around that issue?
Well, you know, Naledi, that issue has been tabled recently. It's sitting with the president. It needs to be signed off. It's totally incorrect. There's two parts to it. This is the owners of big corporations versus the authors and the artists, which is us. And I think that is the issue about how much of an image can you own. And I think it's in South Africa in particular, there's no clarity as such as to, as the author or as the artist, how much of an image do you own. We feel as artists, as authors, that we should be owning 100%. Depends which organization wants to use it. If it's commercial, we'll go commercial. If it's an NGO or government body, we will look at it. But I think it's for the author to decide on that issue. If it's going to be brought into law, like in other countries, I think it should be, but it needs to be seen. But it is a very sensitive issue right now in terms of income and ownership.
Yeah, and it's, I'm going to stay on that issue, Reggie, and I'll bring this one to you. The sort of conversations that are then being had within the South African National Editors Forum as you look at the legacy of Dr. Magubane. I mean, one of the things he did throughout his life, very intentionally, was to unmask propaganda, right? What conversations do we have within the National Editors Forum at the moment around the responsibility of journalists to do just that in an era where, you know, we can have a conversation back and forth around whether or not society trusts the media?
Well, look, Naledi, on society trusting the media, we know that's work in progress. I mean, it's essentially why SANEF did the Searchwell inquiry, where Judge Katie Searchwell and two other colleagues looked at ethical journalism and what we are doing, you know, across the spectrum in the media. We know it's not only a South African issue across the world. If you go through the Edelman Trust Barometer, it will tell you government and the media, they rank high up in terms of low levels of trust. But that's something that we are working on. And we have seen during the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic that South Africans do believe still in the media. They do trust the media. There was a lot of mis and disinformation, but the greater South African public did come back and say we are going to rely on credible media, and that's what I mean. The legacy of upholding the legacy of Dr. Magubane. That's exactly what we need to do. To say, as the media, we are not going to be factional. We are not going to be, you know, supporting any propaganda. And I think if you look at what the South African media is doing now, say in the political spectrum and covering all political parties, we do that fairly and we do that robustly. And that's what media does. And then it's a conversation we are having. We are having this conversation in a digital age where media is very constrained, where media has its own challenges, particularly from the revenue perspective, revenue perspective. So that's exactly the conversations that we are having. But we are saying, you know, photojournalism is here, journalism is here to stay, and we still have, you know, an awesome bunch of photographers that came after Dr. Magubane, current photographers that are there, that are doing excellent work as photojournalists, as multimedia journalists as well. So that's, we will always be accused one way or the other as the media of taking sides and all of that. But we always say, we go out there without any fear, without any favor, and all we want is to do our job and do that job excellently.
You know, I think about hearing Dr. Magubane once saying that, you know, once I'm behind that lens, I become a lion. And you certainly can see it in the images that he took. If you go back to even the images of 1976, there's one where he's standing in front of these children as they march, angry, frustrated children marching directly towards him. I mean, that's braveness. That image over there of the nannies only, juxtapositioned against a Europeans only bench. The kind of bravery that it takes to stand in front of this injustice and take that picture, that's guts. That's a lot of guts to be able to pick up that lens. Mr. Matata Tsedu, you certainly, as a veteran journalist yourself, I'm sure spend a lot of time looking at the quality of storytellers, photographers, journalists of our generation. Do you see that level of bravery as well?
Yeah, there is. I mean, my approach in these matters, especially when we are discussing old and new and stuff like that, is that every generation of journalists confronts its own challenges at that time. So when you talk about Peter, the kind of censorship, for example, that he had to deal with was in-your-face cops hauling you to jail straight away and taking your film, taking your camera, smashing it, shooting you, jailing you, and all of that. Today, you're finding that when people for example, at the kind of riots or protests that happen nowadays. There'll be a lot of looting. And when journalists or photographers are taking pictures of looters, they'll be attacked. That's censorship of today. Because those people know that once the picture is published, the cops will be after them and they will take them. But I also think that when we speak about Peter, we should not forget that he was not just a photojournalist. He was not just a family member or a friend of the family of the Mandelas. He was an underground activist of the ANC and did a lot of work in that space. Being a photographer allowed him to move around the country using that as cover of why he was in particular spaces. Meanwhile, moving messages, moving things so that the struggle should go on. So the brave, when he says, I become a lion, some of the younger photographers who worked with him would say to you, Peter would never yield a space to a younger person. But that's because, in his opinion, he wanted that shot and he would set it up and hit it, and it would be history-making pictures.
Yeah, and I suppose for younger journalists, it would be watch, learn, and that's an important thing. When you look at that level of bravery in photojournalists, one of the questions that's asked, of course, quite often is, once you've taken the picture, what do you do, right? Do you take the picture and then leave the situation as it is? And of course, Mr. Matata Tsedu, you've talked about how he was an underground activist as well, and he spoke very, emphatically as well, certainly towards the last few years of his life, about how after I put that camera down, I went to action. Right, again, I was an activist and not just a storyteller. Vern, perhaps you can talk to us a little bit about that. I mean, when you look at the archives behind the photos, what we know he actually did, some of the things that really stand out about what Dr. Magubane did after putting the camera down.
Well, this is true of so many journalists, photographers, is that they have other identities, and I'm talking about the struggle years here, and it does go back to Reggie's point earlier about the role of journalists is do you choose sides? Are you telling a particular story? And I think in the conditions of apartheid, there was no choice there. Is that you're documenting a struggle, but you're also part of that struggle, and it does raise a number of really interesting questions around the profession, around the ethics of the work. But just one thing to note, it's really a question for Rashid, is that dimension of Peter's work, which involved almost the immersion in a particular space, and the courage it took to be immersed, but also giving him that ability to, when the decisive moment took place, to be able to press the shutter and get that image. It's an incredible skill but also it's about being in that space and being absorbed in that space. I think that is a characteristic of Peter's work.
Yeah, Rashid, you're more than welcome to make a point there, because an incredible one around timing, the moment, right?
Yeah, and just to take it further, it's, you've clicked the shutter, you've got the image, it's a daring image, but the next point is how to get it out. Now that's the critical part, is getting that image out. Because it's inevitable we're going to be arrested, and the first thing they would go for is the film. So it is about the runners you have around you that's able to take the film and go to a point that's been set up. And that was the other magic about how, well, certainly myself, I've learned how to get images out, and film in particular and it was all a set of runners. And hence a lot of images got out of the country because the system just couldn't get hold of it, couldn't control the method of us operating. And I think that was really that generation of the likes of Peter, the Alf Komalos, Willie van de Klerk, the Mike Nzelenis, so it was like a kind of a system that we set up amongst ourselves.
Yeah.
Get the film out. And that's what expected from all these agencies.
Can I ask further, just to follow up on that question, because I'm trying to picture what that looks like, right? You know, when you say, you had a group of runners. Can you give me a practical example? Because I'm imagining, the picture being taken, the film being, and then immediately, a sort of relay of, well, take the film and run. What did that visibly look like?
Exactly like that, a runner. And it could be a young activist who we all know, or we know individually, or we set them up individually. Everyone had their own runners. We would never use the same. And coming out of Cape Town, I'd work in other places in Namibia, Southwest Africa then, or other places in Africa. There's always that runner that will take the film, that get it to somebody, it will eventually get onto a flight and out of the country. And I think that was really critical, that kind of relationship with individual younger people.
Yeah, we've got a few more minutes left and I want to open up the lines. So feel free to give us a call on the number 011 714 0661. Again, 011 714 0661. So let's talk a little bit about what happens now, right? The targets that you've set for yourselves at the workshop. As you go into 2024, I imagine a big conversation around, well, we're going into elections. This is certainly one of those elections that's going to be a hot one. Some have even called it nearly as important as 1994. And again, a moment that needs to be documented well. What's the conversation you have with one young photojournalist in 2024?
I think what is important is what doesn't change. Is that conviction to tell stories fairly and as well as possible based on actual real lived realities. It's interesting, the election years, our students that study within our election years, their experience actually is often different from non-election year students. And this is because we do get them to photograph elections, but what is important is that we're not only photographing the fact that there are elections, but also looking into the issues. What are people going through at the moment? So if, for instance, a big one would be something like protests around service delivery. People are not only just protesting against service delivery, there are issues, but what are the issues? So we try and get our students to do these stories where they actually go into communities to find out what is the problem in this area exactly. Yes. Speak to people who live in this area and document and show that this is why people are protesting.
Yeah. Show that dry tap.
Yes.
Show the dirty river.
And how it inconveniences people. Yeah. How does it make people's lives difficult? How would they like their lives to be better?
Yeah, Reggie, I'll bring this one back to you. Mr. Matata Tsedu earlier talked about how the journalist, and particularly the photojournalist or videographer in current day journalism and storytelling may be, I suppose, wary of getting into the action because they too get attacked in a protest, for instance, is in a service delivery protest, for instance, by the communities themselves. And again, a pivotal year, this one. What do we take, and what is your message to the videographers, the photojournalists at community level, at national level, across all storytelling platforms about how they tell the story of 2024 and learn from the life of Dr. Magubane?
Well, look, Naledi, it's a critical year for South Africa. It's 30 years of democracy. It's one of the most critical elections we have ever had. It's going to be hotly contested. it's in that light that we have closely been working with the IEC to say the media needs to be accorded its space. The media needs to be accorded, the time and the space to do its work. We have had reviews of the 2019 local government elections, of what went wrong there, what we can do better this time around. And our videographers, our photographers and journalists need to continue telling that story. Communities need that story to be told. They want that story to be heard. They want the media that's not fearful. They want the media that will go out there and capture the story. And it's a message that we keep on reiterating, particularly to political leaders, to speak to their supporters. It's a kind of a community outreach education that we've been doing, where we say if journalists are in their particular community, like what we have seen in the past year, where several news crews were attacked across our townships, that we will not only condemn that, but we will also call on the police to do something. We will call on community leaders to speak to those to their communities, to say, the media when it's there, they are not there as your enemy. They are there to capture the story, to capture what's happening and report on that fairly. So during these elections, it's going to be tense. We expect that, but we expect also our photojournalists, much as we support them, to be brave enough to go out there and tell the all-important story.
Yeah, the word again is brave enough, because it is, it really is a responsibility that we have towards our citizens. A great call to action, I think, there, to be brave as we set the tone on 2024. Of course, the passing of Dr. Peter Magubane, a sad one, but really an opportunity for us to make a decision about the stories we tell in the year that comes. Vern, we're about to wrap up. You, as the archivist at the Nelson Mandela Foundation, have this great array of images and information that is accessible to us. How do we come and learn?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that the body of work that Peter produced is of incredible value, both in terms of heritage, but also in terms of a public resource that can be used in all kinds of creative and educational ways. But I think the critical thing now for those who will be responsible for Peter's estate is to make sure that archive is well organized, and is used in ways that would honor Peter. This is a critical one. I don't have inside information on that, but we as a foundation are available to provide support from an archival point of view.
Yeah, an important point there, and a great way for us to close the discussion as well. Thank you so much to all of our guests. It's been a very insightful conversation. Thank you so much to Matata Zedu, veteran journalist, Vern Harris, acting Nelson Mandela Foundation Chief Executive and Archivist at the Foundation. Also joining us, Regimwa Lucy, Executive Director of the South African National Editors Forum, and of course Mr. Rashid Lombard, veteran jazz and political journalist. In studio, says Kwana Dlamini, who was Programs Manager for the Photo Market Workshop. It really has been an insightful hour. We look forward to spending this time with you again next week, Sunday, between 9 and 10. And that's it from myself and the rest of the Media and Society team. Have yourselves a wonderful Sunday.